in 2005, word got out in Timor-Leste that the Timorese government of the time was discussing with foreign experts the question of making religious education, and particularly catechism, an optional part of the school curriculum, whereas it had previously been compulsory. Now, the Catholic Church in Timor-Leste was not very pleased about this, and in fact they organised a demonstration to protest this move. Now, I don't really want to go into the ins and outs of the policy or of the church's position, but I think what was interesting to me about that demonstration was the way that it was organised. Now, the church sort of sent out messages to various parts of the country and called young people to get involved in these demonstrations. Trucks and buses were chartered to bring those people in their hundreds to the capital city, and they demonstrated during the day in the main square, and at night they all sort of went off and were billeted around various churches and churchyards in Dili. The church organised food for the demonstrators, most of whom were poor people who clearly didn't have the money to support themselves in the capital city, and it gave out T-shirts with messages on, so you could tell who was in town for the demonstrations because they were wearing their T-shirts. And it organised various sort of speeches and things during the day for the crowds of protesters. And these protests continued in Dili for 3 weeks. So the atmosphere around Dili at the time was quite tense, and if you went into the back streets you could see sort of busloads of police waiting with tear gas canisters to intervene in case a confrontation began. And because my research was about Timorese politics, I went to the demonstration site with my Timorese research assistant to see what was happening and to see what kinds of things people in the crowds were talking about. And arriving at the scene for the first time, I could hear that somebody was singing into a microphone in the centre of the protest here, and there were hundreds of people gathered around in dense crowds listening. And I wanted to find out what's going on. Is there some sort of event here? And so I sort of pushed my way into the crowds to see what they were singing. Was it going to be some sort of nationalist anthem or militant Christian hymns or something like this? But I was very surprised when I got close enough to find that the microphone was actually attached to a karaoke machine, and a young man holding it was singing Lionel Richie's Stuck on You, and singing it very nicely. And everyone was enjoying it immensely. And at that moment I sort of conceived a very strong intuition that these protests were going to remain peaceful, because I think, with all due respect to Lionel, his songs are never going to furnish the soundtrack to a riot. And this turned out to be the case. After 3 weeks of this standoff, the church and the government eventually came to an accommodation on the issue, and the church, having demonstrated its power, packed these demonstrators off home, with almost no public order incidents having taken place at all. And in a country where getting the most basic services restored and the simplest projects off the ground was held by foreign experts to be an incredibly difficult uphill struggle, the church had apparently quite effortlessly mobilised hundreds of young people around a particular goal, sustained their interest and enthusiasm, kept the lid on any antisocial tendencies while making a rather spectacular political point. So I think this is quite significant, I think, in 2 ways. First of all, because it indicated the very impressive ability of the Catholic Church in East Timor to get things done. And this contrasted sharply with the situation a year later, in 2006, when further demonstrations occurred as a result of the breakdown of order and discipline in another important national institution, the armed forces, and rioting, looting and burning in the capital city quickly ensued. More generally, I think this incident, the demonstrations that the church conducted, indicates the importance of organisation in post-conflict politics. The ability to organise followers, spread ideas, influence opinion, mobilise strength of numbers is fundamental to the ability not just to sort of prevail over opponents in elections or in policy disputes, but to get things done in terms of implementation as well.